Okay, I think I'm ready. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to session number 282 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. Okay. Today we are in the clarification of terms and focusing on the number 3, which is forgiveness and the face of Christ. Forgiveness dash face of Christ. All right? Jesus will be talking about those two things, those two concepts. All right? Just a note on forgiveness. He says the miracle, well, he tells us the miracle, it's an expression of forgiveness. That's when perception changes. That's the miracle. It's an expression of forgiveness. And forgiveness is withdrawing our projection of guilt on people, places, things, ourselves. We just withdraw that projection of guilt. All right? And the face of Christ is the symbol of total innocence. And once again, welcome to New York City. Besides the symphony of sirens, you might, in the background hear the traffic going through the incredibly rainy streets. The streets are very wet. We're expecting 3 inches of rain, so I think we've had about 1 inch so far. So if you hear that in the background, it's not your equipment, folks. It's the streets. But here we go. Forgiveness, the face of Christ. Forgiveness is for God and toward God, but not of God. It is impossible to think of anything He created that could need forgiveness. Forgiveness, then, is an illusion. But because of its purpose, which is the Holy Spirit's, it has one difference. Unlike all other illusions, it leads away from error and not toward it. Okay. So forgiveness is for God and toward God, but not of Him. Right? God doesn't need to forgive anything because He didn't create anything that was guilty of anything. Right? So it has nothing to do with God, really. All right? God just is and emanates the oneness, all right? The ineffable oneness. All right? But forgiveness helps us move toward God, all right? Through the illusion, through the world here, this illusory world. Excuse me. So forgiveness then is an illusion, but because of its purpose, which is to awaken us, to awaken from the dream of separation, it leads away from error and not toward it. So that's the big difference. It's still an illusion, but unlike all the other illusions, it's bringing us toward the recognition of truth. Okay? So, paragraph 2. Forgiveness might be called a kind of happy fiction, a way in which the unknowing can bridge the gap between their perception and the truth. They cannot go directly from perception to knowledge because they do not think it is their will to do so. This makes God appear to be an enemy instead of what He really is. And it is just this insane perception that makes them unwilling merely to rise up and to return to Him in peace. Okay? So he says, we need this because we're so afraid. Excuse me. All right, so forgiveness might be called a happy fiction. All right, just as he refers to in part of the happy dream. We have to transition from our fearful dream into a happy dream. And then we can rejoin the place we never left. Okay? So forgiveness might be called a kind of happy fiction. All right? It's a bridge, a way in which the unknowing, me, can bridge. I can bridge the gap between perception and truth. It's because we could, but we just don't jump right into knowledge, the memory of where we came from. So we need that little bridge, right? We need little steps because our fear demands a slower process, right? Just like my metaphor of going swimming in a cold mountain lake, right? You have to go in slow. I had to go in slow, believe me. All right, so, and it's not what it was fear. Well, I guess it was a fear of, getting, having a heart attack or something, but I was younger then, so I didn't really think of that, but it was just too cold. You got to take it a little bit at a time. So we need these steps because our fear of God, our fear of the really unknown, because we forgot, right? Let's put it this way, the fear of the forgotten demands that we go slow. Take it easy. Hey, don't go so fast. Not so fast. All right? So we need this happy fiction, a way that can bridge the gap between perception and truth. Right? They cannot go directly from perception to knowledge because they do not think it is their will to do so. We think we're otherwise. We think we're separated from the oneness. We think we're separated from knowledge, separated from God, separated from the Creator. Right? And it's just this insane perception that makes them unwilling to merely rise up and return to Him in peace. All right, I missed a very important section there. Sentence 3, all right. This makes God appear to be an enemy because I don't think it's my will to just be in the oneness. That makes God appear to be an enemy. It's like I'm intruding. I'm going to get, He's going to nail me for something. All right, I still have that perception of having done something wrong. So it makes God appear to be an enemy. Right? And it is just this insane perception that makes them unwilling to merely rise up and return to Him in peace. Right? Become unwilling to come face to face with the Creator. Because the ego tells me you're going to be obliterated. You're going to get blown to bits. You're going to die. You're going to dissolve. You're going to just disappear. See, that identity with individuality is fierce. It wants to continue. That's the ego. It wants to continue. So it makes up all these silly stories. God's going to get you. As soon as He sees you, He's going to get you. Like Bob Dylan says, next time you see me coming, you better run. All right. So he says they cannot go from perception to knowledge because they don't think it's their will to do so. We think we're separated. We think we have to sneak around, not be seen by God. Right. And I'm getting that image of my my Latin teacher so many years ago. All right. Yeah, you want to duck behind the guy in front of you so you don't get called on to translate last night's homework. Alrighty then. So paragraph 3. And so they need an illusion of help. We need an illusion of help because they are helpless. A thought of peace because they are in conflict. God knows what his son needs before he asks. He is not at all concerned with form, but having given the content, it is his will that it be understood and that it suffices. The form adapts itself to need. The content is unchanging, as eternal as its creator. Okay. So we need an illusion of help. And we'll see, I think in the next one, well, soon, in the clarification, that Jesus is one of those illusions. Right? We need an illusion of help. Jesus is a helper, a companion on the road, right? But still a helpful illusion, right? Because in actuality, as Gangaji would say, you are that. You are that. You are the risen Christ. You are the part of the mind that woke up. You are the Buddha. You are that. But we need illusions of help so that we can remember that. All right? And it becomes a process. And so they need an illusion of help because they're helpless. All right? I mean, we are here in this world of form, and I mean, you got to admit it, sometimes you feel pretty helpless. You know what I'm saying? Helplessly hoping. Her harlequin hovers nearby. You have to be a boomer to appreciate those lyrics. Well, not really to appreciate them, but to remember them. So we need an illusion of help. We need a thought of peace because we are in conflict. This is a world of conflict. And it's becoming more and more evident these days, let's say. And by these days, I'm doing this video in March of 2024, just for posterity, if there is any. And these days, the conflict is so obvious everywhere you look. Everywhere you look. And so, we need a thought of peace. We need to change that interpretation of the world. Right? And we need an illusion of help. Is there anyone here who can help me? In my mind, I have Jesus, my companion, my friend. The one I turn to. And let me just reiterate that we in the Course in Miracles don't insist that you accept Jesus as your companion. Jesus is a symbol. All right? And it's, look at sentence 5 in paragraph 3 where he says, the form adapts itself to the need. The content is unchanging. It's as eternal as its creator. The content is that unity, that oneness, that love, that ineffable love. Right? St. Paul said, the peace that passes all understanding. Right? And you might not come from a Western culture, a Judeo-Christian culture. Right? So you will have other symbols that help. You will have other illusions that help you. All right? The great yogi that came to the United States in the early 1900s, Paramahansa Yogananda, he came from a different tradition. So he had other symbols, other illusions of help. Right? I believe they had an avatar called Babaji who chose to stay in human form, although he had self-realized. He had realized the truth, but that's their culture. But it's like to say, the truth is one, all right? The content is unchanging, right? The sages know it by many names. There are many cultures, many cultures. I'm sure the indigenous peoples of all countries had their concept of the content that doesn't change. Right? And it fits the form. The form adapts to its need. Right? So that idea would come to them, as the Course says, in a language they could understand. It's the content that doesn't change. So we don't get caught up in the symbols, right? As Ken reminded us, there was a philosopher who said that Jesus came to point the way to God, and people began to worship his finger. They get caught up in the symbol instead of the content. They get caught up in the form. Right? Remember, he says that, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to change some words here. A universal form is impossible, right? But a universal experience, right? An experience of the content is not only possible, it's necessary. It's what each of us needs to be free from the ego. Be free from the idea of separation from the oneness. All right? So the Creator is not at all concerned with form. All right? But having given the content, it is his will that it be understood and that it suffices. So all we need to do is get in touch with the content, as they say. The content is the oneness, the love, all those ineffable terms that you will know, right, as you take the steps. Because as he says, we're too afraid of knowing that right now. For one reason or another. Okay. The form adapts itself to the need. And that goes for our individual lives. We think we have individual situations. Right? The content of love, if we go to our, what we call the right mind in A Course in Miracles, we go to that place in the mind, it just, as Ken would say, can you say help? You're asking your internal teacher, help me to see this correctly. We get in touch with the content, with our helper. Right? The illusion of help. For us, and for me, it's Jesus, Holy Spirit. I just say, help me to see this correctly. And because I came in touch with that content, it will come through me and envelop the form of what I think I'm experiencing. Okay. And help me to see it correctly. Help me to see it through the eyes of oneness. Paragraph 4. The face of Christ has to be seen before the memory of God can return. The reason is obvious. Seeing the face of Christ involves perception. No one can look on knowledge, but the face of Christ is the great symbol of forgiveness. It is salvation. It is the symbol of the real world. Whoever looks on this no longer sees the world. He is as near to heaven as is possible outside the gate. Yet from this gate, it is no more than just a step inside. It is the final step, and this we leave to God. So the face of Christ, here in italics, that's the acceptance of total innocence, the total acceptance of innocence. And I get to that point by, on a day-by-day basis, practicing withdrawing my projections of guilt onto people, places, and things, including myself. All right, I withdraw that projection and I ask, help me to see it correctly. I'm willing to see it differently. And that's the process. And ultimately, you get to that aha moment when the world, the perception of the world changes. What we call the real world in the Course of Miracles. Right? And everything reflects the innocence. And when everything reflects the innocence, that's the face of Christ. That's what he means by that symbol. It's not like you see you see a face. It's just that everything reflects the innocence and the unity of the oneness. That's the face of Christ. And then the memory of God rises without fear. Right? So the face of Christ has to be seen before the memory of God can return, and the reason is obvious. Seeing the face of Christ involves perception. So what we're doing is we're little by little changing our perceptions, right, until we get to the big aha. All right? And you will. He'll tell you in a couple more sessions. Once you start the journey, the end is certain. You will achieve this great peace. Okay. So seeing the face of Christ involves perception. Right. No one can look on knowledge. Right. No one can look on knowledge, automatically just become aware of who you really are, because we're afraid. Our fear, once again, steps in, because we're so attached to this individuality. I'm so attached to the form, right? That's why I'm limited. I can't look on knowledge. I have to take it little by little until I get to that. There's one little step. I have to smile, because he says, you become as near to heaven as possible outside the gate. And then, like, I looked up my Chinese astrology and all that. So I'm an earth ox, and I mean, really. But then it goes a little further and it says the ox outside the gate. Okay. So here I am. All right. The face of Christ. All right. So we say fear, we have this fear of knowledge, fear of knowing the truth, the God. All right. But the face of Christ is the symbol of forgiveness. Right? It is salvation. Right? Once everything reflects the oneness and the innocence, we're free. We've been saved. It is salvation from the thought of separation, from the ego thought system. All right? It is the symbol of the real world. So for the amount of time that we're still here in form, the world is perceived differently. Right? Everything reflects the oneness, the innocence. That's what we call the real world in the Course of Miracles. Right? It is salvation. It is the symbol of the real world. The face of Christ, that is. Whoever looks on this no longer sees the world. Right? He is as near to heaven as is possible outside the gate. Yet from this gate, it is no more than just a step inside. It is the final step, and we leave this to God. Right? It's as if we're just standing there, all right? The gate opens, and next thing you know, you're in. You're in. All right? Paragraph 5. Forgiveness is a symbol too. But as the symbol of his will alone, it cannot be divided. Right? And so the unity it reflects becomes his will. It is the only thing still in the world in part, and yet the bridge to heaven. All right? So forgiveness, it's still in the world, but it's the bridge to heaven. Okay? It reflects the unity. All right? Because in the real world, we still may see differences, different people, colors, genders, sizes, up and down, all that. Right? We still may see those differences, but they don't mean anything. They're meaningless. As Ken would say, the differences don't make a difference. All right? The differences become meaningless. And so the unity it reflects becomes his will. Right? In other words, it reflects the unity, and all of a sudden we become that. It is the only thing still in the world in part, and yet the bridge to heaven. All right. Paragraph 6. God's will is all there is. But can we go from nothingness to everything? From hell to heaven? Is this a journey? No, not in truth. For truth goes nowhere. Truth is always there. But illusions shift from place to place, from time to time. The final step is also but a shift. As a perception, it is part unreal, and yet this part will vanish. What remains is peace eternal and the will of God. So he says, look, in reality, the only thing that there is God's will. And that is the oneness, the unity. But can we go from nothingness to everything? From hell to heaven? Is this a journey? He says, not really, but it seems that way. Right? Because of who you truly are, you don't go anywhere. You never went anywhere. You're always in the mind of God. But it seems like that to us. It seems like a journey. All right? It seems like we're going from hell to heaven. But in truth, we're always in heaven. It is the only thing still in the world, in part. Well, excuse me. Paragraph 6 again. I got to go back to 6. God's will is all there is. All right. He says, is this the journey from nothingness to everything? He goes, no, not really. We experience it that way. But it's not really, because the truth doesn't go anywhere. You are the truth. So using words is the ego framework. And we use that ego framework to lift us back into the oneness. So the truth doesn't go anywhere, and that's who you are. But it seems like we're going places. Right? But illusions shift from place to place, from time to time. And so the final step is also but a shift. As a perception, it is part unreal. All right? So that real world is still, because it's still a perception, even though perception has totally changed, it's still partly unreal, but that unreality part will disappear. It will dissolve. Right? As he says in sentence 8, and yet this part will vanish. What remains is peace eternal and the will of God. All right, so that's the shift. And once that shift has happened, it says there are no wishes now. For wishes change. Right? There's a wish to realize individuality. Now there's only the will of God, the oneness. There are no wishes now, for wishes change. Even the wished for can become unwelcome. All right? So we wished to experience individuality, separateness, and so after a while it becomes unwelcome. Right? We don't want this anymore. All right, make it stop. That must be so because the ego cannot be at peace. So, in other words, we wished for the ego thought system, but the ego can't be at peace. So after a while, it becomes an unwelcomed wish. But will, all right, contrasting it to wish, will is constant as the gift of God. We become part of the will of God. And it's constant. It's unchanging. Remember, the content doesn't change. And what he gives is always like himself. This is the purpose of the face of Christ. It is the gift of God to save his Son. But look on this and you have been forgotten. Well, you have been forgiven. I don't know, Freudian slip. Right? Jeez. You have not been forgotten, believe me. All right? So the ego cannot be in peace. All right? But will, that's why the wish becomes unwelcome after a while. But will is constant, the will of God, the oneness, the innocence. That's the gift of God. God gave us part of himself, or the totality of himself. We live in that, and that lives in us. And what he gives is always like himself. Right? This is the purpose of the face of Christ. So that's the purpose of forgiveness, is realizing that. Remembering that. And it is the gift of God to save his son. Right? That remembering innocence, that ability to change the perception. That's what saves us. Right? But look on this, look on forgiveness, and you have been forgiven. Right? We look on and our process is to look on the innocence of the other and realize our own innocence. Look on the innocence in the other and see ourselves. And then, paragraph 8, how lovely does the world become in just that single instant when you see the truth about yourself reflected there. Now you are sinless, and behold your sinlessness. Now you are holy, and perceive it so. And now the mind returns to its Creator, the joining of the Father and the Son, the unity of unities that stands behind all joining, but beyond them all. God is not seen, but only understood. His Son is not attacked, but recognized. Right? And once we have, and this is practicing that process of innocence, process of forgiveness, all day, every day. As soon as we become aware of it, we ask, help me to see this correctly. Right? I want to see, I'm willing to see the innocence. Any way you want to put it. Because the ego system sooner or later becomes unwelcome, to say the least. Right? I don't want it anymore. Right? Then the world becomes so lovely in that single instant. Now you are sinless and you behold that sinlessness. It's reflected. Now you are holy and perceive it so. Right? And now the mind returns to its Creator. The joining of the Father and the Son, the unity of unities that stands behind all joining, but beyond them all. So every time I'm willing to see correctly, he says, beyond that and standing right behind that is the unity of unities, right? The oneness of all creation. That's what's standing behind my decision to see someone or something correctly. And when we're in that spot, now you are holy and perceive it so. Right? And once we've reached that place where everything reflects the sinlessness, right? The mind returns to its Creator. Right? The joining of the Father and the Son, the unity of unities that stands behind all joining, but beyond them all. And now, God is not seen, but only understood. His Son is not attacked, but recognized. Right? So I become what has been reflected. Right? And it's not the world that changes. It's my perception of the world. Right? Because the world only exists in my mind. And my perception has changed. And now the world reflects the content, the beauty, the oneness. How lovely does the world become in that single instant? All right, so the idea is to practice forgiveness. Be willing. And sooner or later you will be willing, as he says, very poetically, that at some point the wish becomes unwelcome. All right, in other words, you get very uncomfortable, to say the least. All right, so thank you all for helping me, and I will see you in the next session.